Cannabis is for chronic pain. Cannabis can help with chronic sleep problems and chronic stress problems. If you take those indications, in every Western country in the world, 1/3 of the population suffers under one of those problems.
It's a crazy story because it goes to show that you cannot plan things in life, right?
Sometimes in my weirdest moments, I reflect back and I'm wondering if I would meet my 17-year-old self today and would tell him I built Europe's biggest cannabis company. I think my 17-year-old self would say like, what the fuck did you do?
Well, Finn, we're just talking earlier. I told you I'm here in South Africa. And you've also been to South Africa a lot now, also to our last conference. And something that I'm not sure if it's true about your background, right? But you have to tell me. So just quickly about myself, I just came out of uni. And so now I moved to Cape Town, basically. And if I'm not mistaken, does it ring a bell for you in your personal life? Wasn't there something similar? Or what was it with you? Was there a station right after uni going to South Africa? Or am I totally wrong here?
Yes. No, you're completely right. Like I started my career at the BCG, Boston Consulting Group. And that was straight after university. And I had my first project in South Africa. Back in the days, it was Johannesburg, and we created the second national operator of telecommunications in South Africa, which was back in the days Neotel. So Telkom, as we all know, is the former monopolist of telecom infrastructure in South Africa. And Ratan Tata, the Indian billionaire, decided to buy the second national operator license. And they hired BCG to build that company up. So that was a very exciting time just after university. And that was also right about the time where I fell in love with South Africa. So if you tell me now you left university and went to Cape Town straight away, I guess you will follow the same path like me.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm right. I was not sure about that one, but good that we're at least aligned with that one. I'll be curious. I mean, we have tons to talk about the cannabis industry. I'm really curious to learn more about it, where the Sanity Group sits within that. But first of all, what is sort of your first, what are your first thoughts when you think about South Africa? Maybe also even in terms of a business perspective, what are your first, things that come to your mind when thinking about South Africa or Africa as a whole?
Well, to be honest, I think the first thing that comes up to mind is that there's some huge and massive potential in this country that I think compared to other African countries, South Africa already managed better to nurture than other African companies. However, I think if you think that 100% is the potential of where this country could be, it's probably at 50 to 20% maximum right now, because you have everything you need. You have infrastructure, you have big European companies in there, you have big American, even Russian and Chinese companies being active. However, obviously, as we all know, there are challenges in South Africa, health, poverty, partly corruption. So I really think that once the country solves those problems, I think the opportunity for the country is amazing. And every time I'm in South Africa, I'm always thinking like, there's so much potential here. You just have to lift it. There just has to be a movement. But I'm actually very positive about the current government of South Africa, that they at least make a lot of things better than the previous governments. So I think the opportunity and the outlook for South Africa as a country is amazing.
Yeah. Finn, let's talk about Sanity Group. I want to really understand cannabis as an industry, everything, but one thing which really stood out was the ramp up you guys have experienced in the last years, also in terms of revenue. I think you're very open about it, how your revenue figures have increased in the last, especially 3 years. How were the last 3 years for Sanity Group, but also personally, how was it? I mean, let me share with me how your world was throughout that period.
Yeah. So I can tell you, like, being in the cannabis industry is a constant roller coaster of emotions. And the reason for that is because, and that makes it very special, you're heavily depending on regulatory environments. So, for example, if you sell cosmetics online in an e-commerce company, there's not much regulation you need to be clear about. If you're selling food online, yeah, there are food regulations, but there's no much regulation about it. Cannabis is a controlled substance, so it means based on depending on which country you're in, it's classified as a narcotic. The United Nations definitely classifies it as a narcotic. So it means if you're bringing that product into the market, if it's recreational or medical, you're under a very strong and massive set of rules that you need to follow. And the problem is that these rules can change depending on the political will. You have a left-wing party on one day who is all about legalization and liberalization, and all these rules become very attractive for companies. And then the day after, you have a conservative or a right-wing government coming back into power, having a completely different view of cannabis, and things can change overnight. And the reason why we had such a big increase of sales over the last 3 years was because all over Europe, regulations were changing. Germany was the first country that actually reclassified cannabis as a non-narcotic. Now Switzerland actually wants to legalize cannabis completely. The UK is doing a massive steps toward easier prescription of medical cannabis, similar to Poland. And all those developments came in play in 2023, 2024. And that was really like a moment where the company picked up like crazy. And if you think about, or if you ask me now about my emotional roller coaster that I had behind it, my answer would be finally in 2023, things happened that we expected already in 2018 to happen. What I mean with that, the company was founded in 2017. Back in the days, cannabis was legalized medically all over Europe. We were able to do research around cannabis. Doctors were able to prescribe cannabis. However, because the rules were so strict and the governments were conservative all over Europe, we didn't really had the breakthrough that we expected. So we expected that the therapy option of medical cannabis will be adopted very quickly by doctors, by patients, by pharmacists. And that really has never happened. So that was the reason why I would say the first 5 years of the company, from 2017 to 2022, they were probably like hoping that finally things will change. And in 2023 and 2024, they finally changed. And from that point onwards, I can tell you, the whole way of how you manage a company changed significantly. Because from a moment where it was like slow and organic growth and you're trying to like do things better every day, it was suddenly like the breakthrough hockey stick that everyone who founds ever a startup is hoping for. But manage that hockey stick and understanding what scalability means, what we need to do to basically manage the growth, that was pretty much personally, but also business-wise, a very challenging phase. I still think it's very exciting at the same time, so I always call it positive stress. But yeah, so it was an interesting 3 years if I look back from now on.
What were the revenue figures? Did they triple each year? Am I right with
Yeah,
that?
they more than
2023 was.
doubled each year. I think we went from 7 million in 2023 to about almost 20 million in 2024, up to 60 million now in 2025. And to be honest, this year we want to do more than 120 million. So the objective is to more than double each year. And the German market is growing very quickly right now. We just entered the UK market a while back. We see a strong dynamic there. Polish market, the Swiss market. And obviously, we're looking into right now, also, by the way, South Africa. Many people don't even know that South Africa is one of the biggest cultivation sources we're having. But obviously, we are not just a German company. We're a European and a global company. So whenever actually we see that markets are opening up, we immediately investigate and see if it's possible for us to enter or not.
Wonderful, Finn. I mean, there's loads to unfold here. A lot. Very briefly, I really want to understand cannabis a lot better because I think there's a
Yeah,
lot of
sure.
people who are not aware of cannabis itself. But
Yeah.
briefly, because I'm also very interested always, in entrepreneurs and their founding stories and the trigger moments. And it's not your first company. You've been
No.
an entrepreneur already for a while. You also do other things, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. share with me what was that trigger point back then, and even another. I mean, I'm doing too much research. You should do the same. But you also have a political background that is also
Exactly.
associated with cannabis. Tell me, what was the trigger moment when you realized, hey, I'm going to build a Sanity Group?
Yeah. So you mentioned it already. It was not my first business I started. After I left BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, probably now in 2012, I moved to Australia. I founded a very big online fashion company in Australia called The Iconic. Funny enough, there was a sister company also in Africa, South Africa during that time called Zando. I don't even know if they still exist, but obviously during that time, funny enough, I had a lot of relationship with South Africa because we were always exchanging ideas. And funny enough, in many regards, not in every regard, but in many regards, South Africa and Australia are not so different. Um, so that was my first business. Then I came back to Germany. I built up an incubator for Pro7sat.1, which is the biggest European or biggest German media company back in the days. We built up like an incubator to incubate startups and make them big. After that, I became the CEO of an online moving company, Movinga. I had to restructure the company for a while. But to be very honest, I left Movinga to found the Sanity Group. Why? Because first of all, in 2017, as I mentioned, medical cannabis was generally legalized in Germany. So doctors could for the first time prescribe cannabis if they have patients who need it. But as you already mentioned, I also have a very personal story, which is political and personal around cannabis. Because in 2002, 2003, which was just after my high school exam, I was the leader of the Young Conservative Party in Northern Germany. And interesting, like, as you can imagine, in every country in the world, the Conservative Party is rather, as they are named, conservative about cannabis. It's no difference in Germany. And obviously, whenever the left-wing parties back in the days said, like, oh, we need to legalize, the young conservatives were always saying, like, no, it's dangerous, we shouldn't do that. And obviously, I didn't reflect that position much. I just repeated what the party said. And then I had a very personal incident when a person who was with me in the management board of the Young Conservatives basically told me one night that her father died, and he died of cancer. And during that time, when he died and they had to prepare the funeral and everything, the mother, the widow, found a bag of cannabis under his driver's seat. And they were just wondering, and he was a doctor himself, why does he have a bag of cannabis under the driver's seat? So she had no idea about it. She thought he might have been a dealer. And then she found out that he illegally took cannabis for almost 5 years during his chemotherapy. And his colleagues at the hospital, like the colleague doctors, they told the widow that it actually did very good to him. And if he wouldn't have done that, he would have died much earlier. So that actually sparked a lot of curiosity back in the days within me, because I was wondering, why is the Conservative Party so against cannabis when it can obviously help people? And I don't want to go into too much details, but I found doctors in northern Germany who actually illegally grew cannabis in their cellar to illegally give it to patients because the doctors were convinced that this is helping their patients. And that actually changed my mind about cannabis completely, like from the dangerous drug towards a medical application that can really help people and that really has a positive impact. Because if people don't take cannabis, they normally take either nothing, which is bad when they have pain or when they have like chronic problems, or they take things that are much worse than cannabis in terms of addiction, like opioids and a lot of different kind of like Z substances, a lot of different things that are actually much worse. And that changed my mind in cannabis. And now, to make a long story short, I transferred this into political opinions. And I was suddenly fighting within the Conservative Party in Germany for a legalization of cannabis. Obviously, in 2003, it was very early days. I was seen as the odd man out, and everyone thought, like, who's this weirdo who's like fighting for cannabis legalization? But obviously, that always remained something where I was very liberal. And when in 2017, then the German government decided to legalize medical cannabis, that was the moment when I said, like, look, I love the topic. I love building companies. And now for the first time in my life, I can combine both topics, something I love and I know about, and something I can do very good, I think, building up companies. And that was how the Sanity Group was founded.
Yeah. It's a crazy story because it goes to show that you cannot plan things in life, right? But
Absolutely.
they just happen for you. I mean, back then, maybe you're going through the grind at BCG and building other companies. And how aligned does it feel now building the Sanity Group? It's just, in hindsight, it makes so much sense, but it's difficult probably to project
sometimes in my weirdest moments, I reflect back and I'm wondering if I would meet my 17-year-old self today and would tell him I built Europe's biggest cannabis company. I think my 17-year-old self would say, like, what the fuck did you do? So obviously, like, yes, things look very straightforward when you look where I am now and looking at my career. But again, like, I mean, if I would have not had the situation back in the days when I was younger where I changed my mind about cannabis, who knows what I would do today? I would probably still be an entrepreneur, but who knows in which topic. So I can tell you, like, one thing about my life is probably I always followed the flow. I didn't really plan my life on a whiteboard and say, like, oh, by that age I have to achieve that. I was always very ambitious. I was always doing internships during university. I always wanted to go into consulting for the career, but it was not really that I always had a full picture in my mind where I want to go. And that's the reason why, again, in 2017, when the German government decided to legalize medical cannabis, I just decided to go with the flow and said, like, look, it's an opportunity. It feels good at the right moment. My gut says me do it, and I did it. And looking back, maybe there could have been things that I could have also done that would have been even more successful. But I think I'm quite happy with what we achieved over the last years. So it all feels very well.
Wonderful. I mean, I definitely want to learn more about cannabis, but I'm just so fixed by this your story. What is that flow like? Can you describe that just briefly for me? How does it feel like? Do you really feel it in your? Is it really a gut feeling?
Yeah. So
anything you could share about
that? I can tell you, like, it's a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, people sometimes say it's a superpower. Some people say it's something bad. But I was very early in my life diagnosed with ADHD. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but that's actually kind of attention deficit. So it means, like, if there would be like a fly flying around here, instead of focusing on you, I would just like look around and look at the fly. That was very early in my life already. I decided never to like take medications based on that. I just decided that I can manage this. And it's basically true. But what you find out is that people who have ADHD, they are very much living in the moment. So whenever they're excited about something, they're doing it. Whenever they're like enthusiastic about it, and they follow that. And they're not very rational in these things. And I think that probably describes me very well as a person, because I'm a very enthusiastic person. And if the enthusiasm sparks in me, I'm normally following it. And I think that's what I called when I mentioned the flow earlier. It's like I see something, I love it, and then I do it. And very often I do it, to be very honest, without overseeing all the consequences it might have. It brought me in my life sometimes in trouble, but overall I can say, like, I always came out well. So I think that's the kind of flow that I was referring to, like really following a passion you see, following what you really feel inside makes sense for you, and then do it. And then, to be very honest, I never really regretted it, and I wouldn't have done it anyhow else if I look back.
Yeah, I mean, it resonates actually. Don't want to make it about myself, but also have my own ADHD story, which
interesting.
And I'm very sensitive, right? Which can be a good thing, but also a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right.
I can tell you what cannabis helps, and that makes me spinning you back to the question what cannabis is. I can tell you one of the biggest problems I had all my life was falling asleep at night. It's not that I think my body doesn't want to sleep. It's also a side effect of ADHD very often. You just think a lot. You think a lot of impressions you get over the day. And one of the things that your brain can't do is filtering really what's important and what's not. And very often I lay awake at night because I was thinking about the most random, unimportant stuff. But in my mind at that moment, it was the most important thing in the world. And funny enough, when I was like, I would say 41, 40, I went to my doctor and we talked about like historic indications, and I told her that historically I always had ADHD. And then she asked me, and I promise you the story is true. Like, she asked me, have you tried cannabis against it? And I said, no. And she's like, well, there's not much research about it, but there are strong indications that cannabis can help there. And from that moment on, when I had these episodes at night where I realized I can't really sleep, I took a prescription for cannabis, and it really helped me. So I'm not a recreational or fun consumer. I mean, to be very honest, I enjoy using cannabis. I think it's nothing bad to say, but for me, it's really the functional effect of like killing my ADHD at night so I can sleep better. So, and that's the reason why I think this plant is magical in many ways, because I think we are just at the beginning to understand what cannabis actually can do for you.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Maybe I'll follow up on that some other time to get some advice here. But that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Finn, tell me, you just mentioned it. So there's recreational use, there's medical
Yeah.
cannabis. How do I make sense of all the uses of cannabis just broadly? You
Yeah.
know, how can we use
So,
cannabis and how is it used today?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to bore anyone with details, but I think it's very important to mention within a few sentences of how cannabis works. So cannabis is a plant by definition. It's a super old plant. It was used in the old Chinese times for pain treatment. It was used already by old Egyptians. It was used in Germany by the nuns in the monasteries. So it has a long medical history. And the thing, this plant is not just the plant. So the thing is, you have so-called cannabinoids in the plant that are building out during the growth phase. And cannabinoids are nothing else but active ingredients. So these active ingredients can be THC, CBD, CBG, CBN, and 110 more of those cannabinoids. And what Israeli researchers already found out in the 90s is that you have a cannabinoid system in your body. And those cannabinoids of the plant, they dock into your system and they can regulate certain body functions. They regulate hunger. So if you're hungry, so that's the reason why in chemotherapy, when you have cancer, cannabis might help you very well, because normally people lose hungriness when they take chemotherapy. So basically, having the so-called munchies can help you basically to get like this hunger again. It regulates sleep. It regulates a lot of different. It regulates pain, a lot of different things. And the interesting thing is, if you think about the historic use of cannabis, even though we think of cannabis as a recreational drug that is fun and social and cool to hang out with, the original use of cannabis has always been medical. And funny enough, and I'm not kidding you, if you ask 100 people on the street, completely average, why do you use cannabis? In every country in the world, the result is similar. More than 60% still say dominantly medical reasons. And that's something we are ignoring. So obviously you also have the recreational use, which is quite different. It's people, as I mentioned, for social reasons. You hang out, you actually love to chill, you love to enjoy. You just basically, similar to drinking alcohol, you're wanting a funny effect. Some people want to be creative with that. Some people want to just chill out. However, what we always say is there are two separate ways of using cannabis. One is medical, which are also called functional, and the other one is basically just for fun. But you have a lot of areas in between, because a lot of people take it for medical reasons, but they also like it, or the other way around. They take it for fun reasons and they realize it helps them. And that's the reason why I would say both aspects have their reason. I also was always under the opinion that you should legalize both, because a regulated recreational market where the government on taxes and the police doesn't have to do bullshit jobs is always better than having the illegal market growing like crazy and the organized crime earning money with it and the police running after the organized crime, but very often not very successfully. And that's the reason why, again, you have this one plant, you have many ingredients in the plant, they regulate your body. But you can use those regulators for two different aspects. One is the medical, really thinking about what kind of symptoms I want to fight. And the other one is a fun effect. And I would say at the end of the day, if you really look at the whole population of people who use cannabis, it's probably 50-50 at the end.
Mm. Tell me, just from a historical perspective, why is it that cannabis is so stigmatized in our society?
I can tell you, it was not until 1930 or until 1940. The interesting thing is, unfortunately, I cannot ask my grandmother anymore, but the time when my grandmother was alive, you could buy cannabis in the pharmacy without even a prescription. You could just go to the pharmacy and say, like, I want to have like 100 milligrams of cannabis or of THC. And you would have get a little tincture. It was the same in the US. It was the same in Canada. It was the same in Germany. It was the same in Europe. It was the same in England, in Australia. So basically, until the 30s, cannabis was basically accepted as a pharmaceutical. However, and then if you're interested in that, everyone should Google that and look into it. But I'm quickly summarizing it. One of the biggest things that happened, which is also seen as very unfair to cannabis in retrospective, is that the US government in the 30s and 40s saw a big problem with the migration of Mexican people into the US. Could say like hasn't changed for the last 50 to 100 years, but that was the fact that first time these back in the days, illegal migrants came to the US. And those people were using cannabis very often for recreational reasons. And back in the days, and again, like you can Google it, it's an interesting story. The US government needed a reason to actually push those Mexican or Latin American immigrants back out. And they basically made up, and I really say made up, the story that basically they bring cannabis as a recreational drug into the country. And that is the reason why the crime rate goes up in the US. That's the reason why the murder rate goes up in the US. There were even quotes from US politicians, which are very high level, saying like they believe that almost 80% of the crimes done in the US and almost 100% of the murders done in the US back then are because people are using illegally cannabis, which is obviously complete bullshit. But they needed something back in the days to blame the Mexican or Latin American immigrants and tell them that this is the reason why they need to leave. And there were propaganda movies about it. There were even government-financed movies about the fact that cannabis is dangerous for you. Obviously, if you look at those movies today, you think like crazy that people were saying that because it was just not true. And the problem is, or the fact is, that back in the days, the US was the number one country in terms of UN influence, in terms of like coining the research like everywhere in the world and saying like the research shows this. So basically the whole world followed the American example and stigmatized cannabis more and more and more. Just during a time, and this is very interesting, when basically medical research, on the other hand, was really advancing. So in a nutshell, for example, aspirin and cannabis in the 20s, they were both sold in the pharmacy as an extract without any research behind it. Cannabis was forbidden, but with aspirin, basically research was done, and today you can buy like little pills of aspirin everywhere in every pharmacy, or even in supermarkets, while cannabis was forbidden, and that means also no research took place. And what we're doing right now, since the 90s or early 2000s, we are catching up on the research that was missed to be done in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, when most of the big pharmaceuticals were developed. And that's the reason why I think cannabis is a very interesting substance as well, because when you talk to people, they think always about it's a drug, and they never think about a pharmaceutical. While when you talk opioids, fentanyl, for example, you always think it's a pharmaceutical, and only the second thought says like, oh, it can also be a drug. But the fact that fentanyl is a much bigger problem as a drug than cannabis, and that fentanyl is the misuse. I mean, everyone knows the stories from the US, the zombies, the zombie people who walk through San Francisco full on fentanyl. And I think always, I'm also talking to politicians all the time. It's so irrational to say that opioids are not a problem and they should be easy to prescribe for doctors, while cannabis at the same time is a dangerous drug. It's just based on nothing. And if you look at the UN Charter and also WHO, the World Health Organization, you see that by far the most dangerous drug is tobacco, then at some point followed by alcohol, followed by many other things. And compared to that, cannabis is really, really low on the harm ratio. Again, I don't want to say that cannabis is easy and cannabis is like not harmful at all, but compared to things that we normally use every day, you can actually almost say that cannabis is not as dangerous.
Isn't there even a similar story with psychedelics, actually? Because they were used by protesters of the Vietnam War and
Exactly.
similar...
Exactly. Similar story. And to be honest, in cannabis and in psychedelics, I think we're just at the beginning to understand what they can do in the medical world. I just read yesterday a very big article about a research that was done, I think, in South America, that psychedelics help Alzheimer patients to live again and remember their life suddenly. And it was not like some hearsay. It was a very valid story, and it was published, I think, just a few days ago everywhere. So that after giving a 80-year-old dementia Alzheimer person like psilocybin, they suddenly remembered their life again. They were talking about their life again. They were much better to interact with their peers again in the elderly care homes. And I think really we have no real understanding of what's going on in your brain once you take it. But I think it's very important that the research is done for that.
Mm. So I think that goes to show, and I'm curious to get your input, that lacking research over decades is something that was really problematic. Oh, we also see that in, I think, women's health, right? There's a huge gap in
100%.
women's health, psychedelics,
100%.
cannabis. Is that something that's really the issue that you guys are trying to now catch up with? Is that?
I tell you only one problem with cannabis and research, and that's actually something that I also haven't solved yet. So, let's say when you're Pfizer, very big pharmaceutical company from the US, and you want to develop something against erectional problems, which is today Viagra. You design that ingredient based on your own IP in your own laboratory. So you have an IP for it. It's protected your pharmaceutical for the next 10 years. And you basically do the research around it. And you spend 200 million on doing the research. You're finding out it really helps. Then you can market it. And for 10 years, no one else can market it. Only you. And you get all the revenues that comes from Viagra into your own pockets. And you need that to refinance the research costs for you to be profitable. The problem with cannabis is that there's no patent on cannabis. There's no patent on THC. So if I spend 200 million euros now to prove that THC helps against ADHD, pain, sleep disorder, whatever, and I spend 200 million and go to the world and say like THC helps, like 99 other companies would say like, oh, thank you for the research. And now we're doing our own product and we can put the same labels on the product because it's not protected. There's no IP on cannabis. And that is the reason why still today, many companies are not spending much money on cannabis research. And I think that's a shame. And I'm lobbying for the government all over Europe for a long time already to change that, to make sure that basically also the government supports these research studies, because the private companies will not do it if it doesn't have any commercial impact for them. But I think we need that pharmaceutical better researched.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Finn, let's talk about Sanity Group, where the Sanity Group sits within the cannabis industry. You just mentioned cannabis. There's cannabis for recreational use. There's cannabis for medical use. You're saying it's about 50-50 in terms of use.
Yes.
But where does that split sit within the Sanity Group? Is that already reality or is it rather different? Tell me, how is the Sanity Group structured?
So I mean, there is only one half legal and one tolerated cannabis market where you can commercially do revenues in cannabis in Europe. And number one is the Netherlands. But in the Netherlands, it's only tolerated. So as a legal company, you cannot really do revenues with cannabis. It's most of the time within private hands. Because the problem is if you sell cannabis in a coffee shop in Amsterdam, for example, you still need to be partly illegal because you can sell it legally to customers, but you cannot buy it and grow it legally. And that's the reason why if you run a coffee shop in Amsterdam, you're still illegal. So we can't run coffee shops. So obviously that market is close to us. What we're doing, though, is Switzerland is very progressive on cannabis, and they implemented so-called pilot projects. What does it mean? The Swiss government is partnering with companies like us and universities for research to have geographical regions within Switzerland where you have participants in a research study. For example, we have one in Basel with 3,000 participants who basically can go to a kind of coffee shop or dispensary in Basel to buy cannabis. And once every 3 months, they have to answer questions in a survey that gets sent out by the university. And with those answers to those questions, we basically do a research study and we send it back to the government. And based on that, the government will decide if they want to legalize or not, and if yes, how they want to legalize. So in Switzerland, is more progressive. They want to legalize. I think by 2028 is the latest timeline. But the reason why I'm telling you that, there's only very limited opportunity in Europe to do recreational sales. So this pilot project in Switzerland that we are running is probably 3% of the overall Sanity Group sales. Everything else, it's purely medical. So in terms of share, I would say 97% of our revenue as of today is medical, which is also the DNA of the company based on my history. But I was always very open from the beginning. There are some people who love medical cannabis and hate recreational cannabis. I was always very transparent and very open towards the fact that I think both needs to be regulated. And if both is regulated, we want to play in both fields. However, as I mentioned, almost every country in Europe by now legalized medical cannabis, but only 2 European countries somehow kind of regulated recreational cannabis. And that's the reason why our revenue share in that is 97 and 3.
Tell me, I mean, you just alluded to it very often in this podcast already. What are the most common use cases for medical use of cannabis? Just tell me, what are the use cases? What are maybe benefits that patients are experiencing? How are they getting in touch with cannabis in their day-to-day life? Because I haven't had contact with cannabis yet, but obviously I know that the Sanity Group is such a huge topic right now. Tell me, how do I meet, or what's my contact with cannabis in the Sanity Group as a user or a patient?
It's interesting. So there is, I would say, 2 different ways from a medical perspective to get in touch with cannabis. Number one is, and that really exists, you go to the doctor and you say like, look, I have chronic pain for 5 years. I tried opioids. I tried ibuprofen. I tried everything. Nothing is helping anymore. And very often the doctor today tells you, at least in countries where this is legal for 5 to 6 years, have you tried medical cannabis? And this kind of use case, the patient has never tried that before or even considered it. So in that case, by the way, when you have already tried many other things and it doesn't help and the doctor tells you now you have to try cannabis, it's covered by the health insurance very often. It's covered by the health insurance in the UK, in Germany, most likely in France in the future. And the average age of that patient group that I was just mentioning is probably around 65 to 75. So it's a really old age group that basically has chronic indications for a long time. They see no basically way out of it, and then they take cannabis. So that is the way number one. You have no idea, you have some problem, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, have you tried cannabis? That's probably 10% to 20% of the overall patient market. Most of the patients are patients who actually illegally self-therapize them because they found out by themselves that it helps them. And there you have mostly sleep, you have mostly chronic stress, you have very often ADHD. So you have a lot of people who use cannabis and historically illegal, like the father of the friend I was talking about earlier. And they self-therapize. They really like buy it illegally. And after the change of legislation in Germany, for example, those patients decided to leave the illegal market and enter the legal market. And they went to the doctor and say like, look, doctor, I took it for 10 years illegally, but it's helping me. Now I would like to do it legally. Can you give me a prescription? And that's the so-called cannabis savvy user who knows exactly what they want. They know exactly what helps them. They know exactly what kind of ingredient they need, if it should be high THC, low THC, if it should be an extract or a flower. So they are very savvy and they know what they need. Those are probably, I would say, 60% of the patients. So again, 20% cannabis naive, have no idea, never tried it, doesn't know what's doing to them. 60% then cannabis savvy, they used it before. And then you have 20%, and that's really the group that's growing. Maybe it's a group like you or like I was, who say like, look, I'm reading the research studies and I'm really thinking maybe it helps me. Maybe it can help me. Maybe I do have chronic sleep problems. I do have chronic stress problems. I've never tried it by, hey, let's give it a try. Go to the doctor, check in with him. And that's kind of the group in between. You're neither cannabis naive because you obviously did your research, but you're also not cannabis savvy because you haven't taken it before. And these are the people that I think are growing very heavily. And interesting enough, those are the people that definitely don't want to smoke cannabis. So the group of 60% that use it is historically, they all are smokers. The only way how they get access to cannabis is buying the flower and smoking it, and that helps them, and they want to keep smoking it. The 20% that have no idea and are naive, they normally take extracts because when you're 65 and have cancer, you don't want to start smoking. And then the people in between are mostly millennials, like stressed people who come from work between 40 and 60, and probably historically even take cigarettes or alcohol to basically calm down after work. And they basically wonder if cannabis is not the healthier method of doing that. And that's actually, I would say, another 20. So really depends on where you are in your mind and where you are in your indication. There are several ways. What's very interesting is that in Europe, for example, over the last years, what was booming in Switzerland, UK, Poland, but also in Germany, are teleclinics. And teleclinics make the barrier much easier for patients to basically approach a doctor. Because if you, for example, think about the stigmatization, if you have a 60-year-old doctor that sees you for 20 years and you suddenly tell him, hey, what about cannabis? You almost feel bad because you immediately know that the doctor is forming a picture about you and probably thinking like, maybe that guy's a drug addict. And because people don't want that, they rather go to teleclinics where they have a more, and not anonymous, but they have a way of not needing to talk to the doctor that they talk about everything else every day about it. And that's something that's very much booming. And that's, I would say, by now, the number one way in Europe of how people are actually entering the medical cannabis market. They go to a teleclinic, they have a video conference, they have it with a doctor who's specialized on cannabis, and basically exchange things, either your patient history or about your preferences. And then the teleclinic prescribes, and then you can pick it up in the pharmacy. I think that's at the moment in Europe the normal way of entering that market as a patient.
Mhm. So these teleclinics are mainly your distributors, or you probably work then with tons of different distributors who distribute your products, or how can I see that happening?
So coming back to our company, so we are basically a distributor, but we are so what we are doing, we haven't even talked about it yet. What we are doing, we basically work together with doctors and think about what kind of like forms of cannabis in what kind of dosage form or whatever it is helping patients legitimately. And then we think about, okay, it's extracts, it's flowers, it's different forms of like oral sprays or whatever it can be. And then we actually either decide to source it, so to go to Canada, go to Uruguay, go to South Africa to basically source the product, or very often we also decide to develop it ourselves. So, for example, we have a cannabis drinkable that's especially for people who want to have a low dosage microdosing in the morning. We have a drinkable that's for people who don't want to smoke and have it in the evening for sleeping. So we develop those products. So it means that Sanity Group itself, we have different brands and different product portfolio under those brands. But we are not a doctor and we are not a pharmacy. So that means that we have a team of people who then starts relationships with teleclinics, and the doctors who sit behind the teleclinics. We explain them why our products are well developed, where the products help. We have a whole team of doing research studies within our company that basically shares those studies and summarizes of those studies with the doctors. So it means we basically try to convince the teleclinics that our products are very good for any kind of indication that a patient who cannabis can help can use it. And that's the reason why they're not really our distribution partners, but in the medical world called their prescription partners. Similar to Pfizer goes to doctors and tells them that Viagra is better than anything else. It's similar to Novo Nordisk saying like, oh, but Ozempic is better than Mounjaro, which is from Eli Lilly. So that's the kind of work we have to do. But there's no exclusive teleclinic. So every teleclinic is also prescribing other products. For us, it's really important that we have the power to convince the doctors and that we have the right products, that our product is the best. And that's the reason why I think we're doing a very good job there. We're definitely one of the top 2 companies in Germany. In other European countries, we're probably number 1. All over Europe, I would say we are number 1 or number 2. But that's basically our daily business. Talking to pharmacies about stocking our products, then going to doctors, convincing them of prescribing our products. But at the end, we are the manufacturer, wholesaler, distributor, and the final step of distribution from the pharmacy to the patient, that has to be done by a doctor or a teleclinic.
Mhm. I mean, you just talked about the Sanity Group. We also opened up the conversation by talking about the Sanity Group. I'll be wondering, what was the, let's say, investment story of the Sanity Group early on, and what do you tell them how big the market is still becoming? Because we just talked about recreational use is still minor. I mean,
Yeah.
minor. What do you tell people in terms of sort of market sizing? Can you tell us anything and what
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot
the
of things.
potentials?
I mean, as I mentioned, when I was pitching for the first time in 2017, I was probably a bit too optimistic on the market development. But as I mentioned as well, in 2023, it suddenly, with a change of law, went suddenly up. So it means when you would have asked me in 2017, I would have probably overestimated the market. By now, I think we are there where we expected to be. And there are several things to consider. So there's number one you can consider is when you come from the indication. Cannabis is for chronic pain. Cannabis can help with chronic sleep problems and chronic stress problems. If you take those indications, in every Western country in the world, 1/3 of the population suffers under one of those problems. I just saw a recent study from a German health insurance. 30% of Germans have chronic sleep problems. 25% of Germans would say they have chronic stress problems. And 15% of Germans are saying that they have a chronic pain. It's the same in every Western country in the world. It's like the UK, it's France, it's the US. The numbers change a bit, but it's basically all the same. So if you come from that, let's say for simplicity reasons, let's take Germany as a market with 90 million people. You can say 30 million people theoretically could live a better life by cannabis. Again, it's a very individual prescription at the end, and not everyone actually can take it well. But we have only 1 million patients so far in Germany. But we have 30 million people that suffer under indications where cannabis could play a role. So that shows you that in theory, in the best case, the market can be even 30 times bigger than it is today. The second thing that you can do is you can talk about the people who use cannabis today, which, for example, again, because I know the German numbers very well, I start with that. It's like probably 8 million people in Germany who regularly use cannabis. If you ask them, 50% say at least medical, the other 50% say it's recreational. So it says you have 4 million people in Germany who already take cannabis based on medical reasons. You only have 1 million patients. So that means that you still have 3 million patients out there, or potential patients out there, who illegally take cannabis for medical reasons but haven't received a prescription yet. So to transform those illegal consumers into patients will quadruple the market straight away. It's not easy because people are also afraid to share their data with doctors, and they're always a bit paranoid about prosecution. But it's possible. So it means you can actually, from that perspective, still go up. And then the last triangulation point is you look at other countries who legalized medical cannabis much earlier than us. So, for example, Israel, I mentioned it since the 90s. It's a big topic. Australia started earlier than us. And you look at the percentage of population that today holds a cannabis prescription. In Australia, it's almost 3%. In Israel, it's 2.5%. And in Germany, it's 1.1%. So even from that perspective, you can easily argue that even from this conservative standpoint, the number in Germany can at least double, but probably even triple. And that is the way how I try to explain people where we are in the market right now. The market is not yet saturated at all. I think we are really just at the beginning. From all different perspectives, you can say maybe 30 million is a bit too bullish, like 1/3 of the population. You can also say okay, half of the cannabis patients, some of them will never, or of the users, some of them will never go to the doctor, get a prescription if they can get it illegally in the park and don't need to justify themselves. But I guess the safest opinion or the safest fact is probably looking in other countries and look at them saying we have 1% of our population of cannabis patients as of today. Australia is 3%. They legalized 3 years earlier than us. So probably over the next 3 years, we will land at 3%. So that's kind of the thing that I normally do to size the market.
It's been all over the news, Finn, that Sanity Group was acquired early this year by a substantial amount of money, 250 million, if I'm not mistaken. Tell me, it was done by Organigram, which is also a well-known company in this space. And I think they were invested earlier. Tell me, and you've had interesting individuals also investing in your company before.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me who are the partners of Sanity Group? Who were the partners early on, and how is the situation right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, funny enough, and to be honest, I'm very happy. I mentioned it earlier in the beginning. I have a background outside cannabis, right? I did consulting, I did other startups, and obviously in the fundraising process, in the angel round, that helped me a lot. Because I can tell you, if no one knows you and go to a big VC fund and say like, hey, I want to do something with cannabis, please give me money. It's not that people jump up and say, hey, shut up and take my money. It's rather skeptical and saying like, who are you and what do you want to do with cannabis? So the background I had with building up successful cannabis companies was actually very helpful to me. To do actually successful tech companies was very helpful to me. And that's the reason why I think from day one, I was able to get a lot of very good people on board. That's, for example, Marto Peric, who's also always coming to the founder conference. He was my first early investor. He trusted and said, like, I completely believe in the business. I believe in you. HV Capital, a big European VC fund, was next. Then suddenly Cherry Ventures came on board, another big European VC fund. And the interesting thing about it is VCs are a bit like followers. If the first big VC fund says, we want to do it, all of the others don't even ask questions anymore. They just follow and say like, oh, we also want to do it. And I think the dynamic was very good in the beginning. However, as I mentioned, emotional roller coaster, then the market didn't develop as quickly as possible as I thought it would be. So that was a kind of a downer for a few years. But I think we managed well. But so that's how I raised the first VC money. And then with the VC money in the background and having like a legit and serious company, we approached celebrities. Why did we approach celebrities? Because we believe that the stigma of cannabis is best fought if you can tell people, normal people like you and me, who are actually not stoners, who are not smoking joints every day 5 times, are believing in the power of cannabis or even using it themselves. And that's the reason why, I mean, Snoop Dogg is always a bit of a funny one because he's obviously not a medical patient. He's obviously someone who just does it for fun. However, we had, for example, the big German soccer stars, André Schürrle, Mario Götze, both stars of the World Cup in 2014 when we won in Brazil. They shot the most important goals in the semi-final and the final. And both completely believed in the power of cannabis from a theoretical perspective. We have a very big German moderator. It's like the Jimmy Kimmel of Germany. His name is Klaas. He, for example, has in his direct environment people where cannabis was extremely helpful during the therapy. And we took those people on board, not because we wanted to have cool names on board, but we took them on board because, first of all, they all had a personal story about cannabis. And secondly, we believed if we put those guys on the front, obviously it might help us with sales as well, but that was not the main topic. But it helps to normalize talking about cannabis. If you hear that the top 2 goal scorers of the German soccer squad in 2014 are investing in a medical cannabis company, then this sparks a discussion in society. Then people say like, I thought it's just an dangerous drug. But if these guys invest, there must be more behind it. And I think one of the biggest missions I have in my professional career, leading a cannabis company, is really fighting against the stigma and bringing cannabis back to the middle of the society where it was like for 3,000 years when you just used it in old Greece, in old Egypt, in old China, even in the German monasteries in the 16th century. So my objective is really to bring back cannabis as something normal, not pretending it's not dangerous, but at least as something normal you can talk about without ideological problems about. And that's the reason why those celebrities have helped us a lot. There's also Alyssa Milano, a US star. She was the main actress, if you remember that, probably not you, but older people from the 90s, Charmed, The Witches. We have also some other people on the cap table. Dennis Aogo, another football player. Steffi Giesinger, she was winning Germany's Next Top Model. We developed a cosmetic line with cannabis with her. So that was actually really fun to have those people and really using them to change the picture of cannabis in the public opinion.
That's great. One more question about that, because in later rounds, if I'm understanding correctly, there was also a major tobacco company, a tobacco giant, actually also later joining on. And tell me more about Organigram. I think it is, in terms of the transaction itself, it's an interesting structure, right? From my first research that I've done. Could you tell me how it's structured very briefly?
It's interesting. It's like, and I try to make it briefly because it's a bit complex, but I'm trying to nailing it down to the main points. So all the big tobacco companies in the world have two problems. First of all, tobacco use is dying. And secondly, they have such a bad reputation that they finally decide to do something good for the world. So if you, for example, see Philip Morris is the biggest tobacco company in the world. BAT is number 2, by the way. Philip Morris invests a lot of money in medical research recently. Like some people would say, are they doing just whitewashing of their business model? I strongly believe all those funds and all those companies are thinking, how can we become more responsible players in society? And BAT, GTI, all the big tobacco companies are thinking the same. And that's the reason why I guess BAT also at some point decided that cannabis, especially medical cannabis, is very interesting for them. So beginning of the 2020s, they decided that they want to place some strategic investments in global cannabis companies. So they did a very strategic stake in Organigram, which is the market leader of cannabis in Canada. They did a strategic stake in us, being one of the market leaders in Europe, and a few smaller ones. Philip Morris was doing the same, and also some other companies like Altria, another big tobacco company, was doing the same. So they invested in us. And I think at some point they probably think about maybe at some point we acquire a cannabis company. However, due to regulation and stock market listing, it's not so easy for those companies to acquire a company 100%. So the way that they handled us was they invested first. Then they basically connected us to their other investment, Organigram. Then over the years, we saw how many synergies we have with Organigram, may it be on distribution, on cultivation, on research, on product development. And over the years, basically also, I mentioned it in the beginning, we have VCs as our main shareholders. The moment you have VCs on board, the exit is your only option because all of these guys want to have their money back. So that means, obviously, I never planned to manage the company for the next 50 years with the same set of investors. So at some point, you have to have an exit. So by the time that we believed it's the right time to do the exit, revenues were going up, profitability hit in, all the shareholders were on board for 7 years and said, like, look, guys, it's time for an exit. We talked to BAT first and said, like, look, you're the biggest shareholder. Do you want to acquire us? Because our shareholders want to go on the market. And due to many reasons, BAT couldn't do it, but they thought it's a very good idea to basically motivate us to talk with Organigram because there are so many synergies between the two companies, and BAT did a passive role in that deal, but they were very positive about it. And that's the reason why at some point we started negotiating with Organigram. And it's all public information, so you can also read it if you Google it. So at the end, BAT funded Organigram so they can acquire us, but had to make sure that they basically don't have a controlling stake in the combined company. And that's the reason why the structure was like you can probably read in the news. So BAT financed Organigram. With that money, Organigram acquired us. And that's the reason why we are now basically 100% daughter company of Organigram. And Organigram has, I think, a 49% ownership of BAT, but it's changing, obviously, depending on the majorities every day. But yeah, that's kind of the structure.
Interesting. I mean, it's interesting. It's a little lecture into M&A and the complexities of it. And I think I
can tell you, nothing is straightforward in this world. Nothing is straightforward in this world. Like, there's always complexities.
Not even M&A.
I mean, to be honest,
especially not M&A.
Yeah, it took us 1 year for negotiating and finalizing this deal. And a lot of relationship building, a lot of trust building was on the way. And a lot of thinking, how can the structure look like? So how can we finance that? So, yeah, I learned a lot during that year, and I'm very happy that we came to a happy end. By the way, we came to a happy end basically 1 week after the counter conference. I was basically telling Leo back then, I'm afraid that I can't come to the counter conference because if the signing is exactly in that week, I would need to go back to Germany. So on the one hand, thankfully, on the other hand, I would have loved to have the signing earlier just to be done with it. But I was still very happy that in the beginning was beginning of February. So just 1 week after the counter conference, I flew back to Germany, went to the notary, signed the contract, and the deal was done, which was quite nice.
There must have been a bit of tension then happening during that time, Finn.
I can tell you, but I can also tell you, I mean, you're fresh from university. I'm now 44, so I've seen a lot of things in the startup world. And if you decide to found your own company, there is no such thing as easygoing and relaxation. It's always something going on, and so it's kind of part of the operating model.
Cool. Good that we have ADHD.
Yeah, exactly.
Finn, one big part of your work, and I want to give you the opportunity because we're coming to an end, but still to say something about it, is public work. I would have loved to talk more about public work, but it was tricky now. But anyways, one question that I like to ask at the very end, which is my question, is what's a major misconception that people have about, we can say, cannabis or the Sanity Group, and we can maybe restructure that question and focus more on what major misconception does the public sector usually have about what you do or society?
Yeah, I can tell you, like, it comes all back to the reputation that cannabis has. So the funny thing is, I can tell you, when I founded this company, I told my parents, I think they didn't really understand what I was doing. And when they read about it in the news, they got suddenly WhatsApps from their friends. And my mother was calling me like, what? You're selling cannabis? You became a drug dealer? And my mom was always very liberal about it, to be very honest. She knows that I fought for it earlier, but even my mother thought for a long time the way you take cannabis is still putting a syringe in your arm. Yeah, so this is a misconception that people over 60 in Europe still have about cannabis. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So obviously, as you can think about the public opinion, all our politicians are not teenagers. They are all in the age bracket, let's say, on average between 50 and 65. So you can imagine that the picture that politicians have about cannabis is not much different from the picture my parents had about cannabis. To fight against that is a lot of work. And I can tell you, and that's really my superpower, because I'm a member of the Conservative Party and I've always been like active in that party, it helps me a lot to make people listen to me. Because if you would be like a left-wing politician or a cannabis activist, and you would talk to a conservative 70-year-old politician in Germany, he would say like, I'm not even listening to you, go further, I don't even want to know. And the fact that I'm kind of like a conservative who has already done a career before cannabis helped me a lot, basically, to do public affairs, as we call it. Many people call it lobbying. I don't like the word lobbying because it's not about manipulating politicians. It's about, to be honest, especially in our case, it's about really stating the facts and telling them what we do. So the misconception you mentioned is obviously we are drug dealers. The reality is we are helping millions of people to live a better life. And to basically form that picture in the public opinion, either the broader public or the political public, is something that's very important for us. And I think, to be very honest, that's something I'm extremely proud about. I think we did a very good job in Germany about that. We have an amazing public affairs team. We write summaries of research studies all the time. We create fact sheets. We look into other countries of how the impact of medical cannabis and cannabis legalization was in Canada, for example. And we all summarize it all day in, all day out, and we send it to politicians. We have political breakfasts with politicians. We basically have panel discussions with politicians. We invite them into the company and tell them how it is. We invite them to our pilot project in Switzerland and tell them how it runs. So unfortunately, there's no silver bullet that you shoot and every politician somehow one day understands it. It's a lot of nitty-gritty work with a lot of 2 steps forth, 1 step back, 2 steps forth, 1 step back. But I have to say I like it. If I ever found a business again, maybe not regulatory heavy as cannabis, but working with politicians and making them understand what's going on in the real world is also something that actually is quite exciting for me.
Amazing. Finn, wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. It was truly a blast to have you here on this podcast.
It was a pleasure.
And
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and I'm wishing you and the Sanity Group and also the cannabis industry all the best for the time to come.
Thank you so much. See you at Counter Conference.
See you.